10,000 years after his fall. The name Horus had become a curse, a ghost whispered only in the darkest corners of the galaxy. But in the endless night of the Indomitus Crusade, when hope and faith were burning out, something ancient stirred beneath the void. No warp storm, no prophecy, just a heartbeat, echoing through the Mater. The Primarch of treachery was returning, not as a man, not even as a demon, but as something far worse, something the Emperor himself could never have foreseen. And this time, the galaxy would kneel. In the far edge of the segmentum obscurus, where the stars flicker like dying embers, a forgotten Imperial listening post drifted among asteroids, its hull split, its machine spirit whispering prayers through static. For centuries, it had listened to nothing but silence and the endless hum of the void. But tonight, it heard a heartbeat. The signal came without warning. A pulse of ancient data, jagged, broken, yet unmistakably alive. It crawled through the Vox net like a ghost clawing its way through the warp. The Tet priest stationed there froze as the Auspex panels flickered green, displaying an identifier that should have been impossible. 16 Legion. Luna Wolves. The sound was not a transmission. It was a memory. A voice from before the heresy, carried across 10,000 years of death. It repeated fragments of battle orders, distorted by time. Warmaster. Advancing. The Emperor. The Emperor. The Vox crackled. A low metallic groan echoed through the corridors as the machine spirit began to chant in binary tongues of fear. Candles guttered. The air turned cold, heavy with the scent of oil and rust. One of the adepts whispered, "That code was sealed after Istvan. It cannot exist anymore." Yet it did. And it was calling home. Outside, the stars dimmed, a thin green mist spreading through the void. The asteroids around the station began to shimmer, each one revealing faint geometric carvings, symbols older than humanity itself. The Omnisea's sigils melted into Necron glyphs, glowing through layers of rock and dust. The adept in charge, Magos Arid Tile, approached the central console. His mechanical eye flickered, reflecting streams of code that twisted and looped like serpents. Every sequence returned the same checksum. Horus. He ordered the signal traced. The data led to a system long marked Exterminatus Complete, a dead world consumed by orbital fire during the Great Crusade. But the coordinates now pulsed faintly, a rhythmic echo, like a dying sun trying to breathe. Then, deep beneath the Vox hum, came a second sound, a whisper. Not words, but intent. It was grief. For a moment, even the machine spirits hesitated. The station's servitors froze mid-motion, oil tears leaking from their mechanical eyes. The Vox emitters trembled as if possessed by memory itself, replaying the final breath of a dying warmaster, distorted, broken, endless. "Father, why?" Magos Tal's human heart skipped a beat. He was not meant to feel fear. His flesh had been replaced long ago. But something primal awoke inside him, a memory of mortality buried beneath steel and circuitry. He turned to the others, all silent, all watching the same cursed waveform repeating across every screen. It was not random. It was a summoning. The green light intensified, bleeding across the metal walls like infection. The Vox began to speak in multiple voices, overlapping echoes of space marines, each repeating their final battle cries from Istvan Kalth. Terra. Thousands of voices merged into one thunderous pulse. The power failed. Darkness swallowed the chamber. Only the glow of the sacred cogitator remained, pulsing like a heart. And then, for a fraction of a second, the monitor showed his face. Horus Lupercal. Half shadow, half memory, his features twisted by age and ruin, one eye burning with cold green light. His lips did not move, but the words thundered across the Vox in a voice that was not entirely human. 10,000 years. And still you kneel to a corpse. Screams echoed as the lights exploded in blinding flashes of gold and red. Servitors convulsed, their limbs cracking. The asteroids around the station shifted, no longer drifting, but orbiting, forming a perfect circle. Within that circle, a black void opened, swallowing all signal. When the fleet from Segmentum Command arrived weeks later, they found nothing. No wreckage, no station, only static. And beneath the static, that same heartbeat still pulsing in perfect rhythm, and across the vox of every Imperial ship in that region, for exactly 9 seconds, one phrase played before vanishing forever: Luna Wolves. Operational. The Imperium dismissed it as a data ghost, a machine echo. But deep within the warp, something stirred. Not demon, not man, but the memory of a god who once defied another. And in the shadow between worlds, Horus Lupercal took his first breath in 10 millennia. The void shivered. The Emperor's dream began to crack. And somewhere far away, Robot Guilliman felt a tremor, a pain he could not name, as the ghost of his brother awakened once more. Terra, the throne world of man, a planet that never slept, only endured. Even now, 10,000 years after the siege, its air still reeked of ash and sanctified decay. The Astronomicon pulsed faintly through the smog-choked skies, a wounded sun guiding the Imperium ships across the stars, deep within the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace. Robot Guilliman, the avenging Sun Lord Commander of the Imperium, stood before the hollow light of the throne. The Emperor's presence, faint and fragmented, shimmered through the air like dying starlight. Guilliman did not speak. He simply listened to the silence, to the hum of machinery, to the unending weight of 10,000 years of failure. Then it came, not as sound, but as a pulse, a tremor that rippled through the warp and stabbed straight into his gene-forged soul. It felt like the universe had taken a single breath and whispered a name it should never have remembered. Horus. Guilliman froze. His heart missed a beat. The air thickened around him, heavy as lead. Every servo skull in the chamber flickered and died. The golden light dimmed, shadows lengthening like black ink. He tried to dismiss it as a warp fluctuation, a phantom echo of the Great Rift, but the name burned inside him, ancient and intimate. It was not the voice of chaos. It was not the roar of a demon. It was his brother's breath. The psychic tremor spread. All across Terra's vaults, astropaths screamed. Choirs collapsed in convulsions, their minds filled with a single vision, a Vol's eye opening in darkness, and a burning sigil of the 16 Legion rising from the void. Guilliman's vision swam. He saw flashes, fragments of a memory he had buried long ago. Isfin, Terra, the final strike. The moment when the Emperor's hand fell upon the War Master. The sound of Horus dying. The silence that followed. But now, the silence was answering back. Impossible, he whispered. You are dead. You must be dead. The light of the throne flared, not brighter, but angrier. The Emperor's psychic field rippled like a storm. For a fleeting second, Guilliman felt something like a tension, a gaze that pierced through eternity. He fell to one knee. My lord, what have we awakened? No answer. Only the low, eternal hum of the golden throne. But within that hum, beneath the infinite noise of souls sacrificed to keep it burning, Guilliman heard it again. Brother. The sound was not heard by ears. It was remembered by blood. He staggered back, clutching his chestplate, feeling his gene seed respond, a phantom resonance, the echo of Lupercal's genetic kinship that still lived within every Primarch. The Emperor had made them as one family. And now the dead one was calling. A custodian rushed into the chamber, helm bowed low. My lord, disturbances across the psychic relay network. A signal, pattern locked to pre-heresy encryption. Segmentum Obscurus reports. Movement. Guilliman's eyes sharpened. The air hissed through his teeth like thunder through stone. Movement where? The custodian hesitated. At the edge of the ghoul stars, source unknown, but the transmission ID reads Luna Wolves. For a long moment, Guilliman said nothing. The flames from the Emperor's dais danced along his armor, blue and gold shadows across the marble. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely human. Seal the channel. Send word to the Inquisition. Not a whisper of this leaves Terra. He turned back toward the throne. His brother's face haunted the air, not in form, but in feeling. A ghost pressing against reality. The old pain resurfaced like a wound reopened, the betrayal, the fall, the pleading eyes of Horus, as the Emperor's wrath descended. He remembered the last time he saw his brother, burning, broken, consumed by chaos, yet this presence felt different, colder, sharper, clean, like steel washed in sorrow instead of madness. The Emperor's golden aura rippled again, casting shadows across Guilliman's face. Was this a warning? Or a summons? He thought of the Indomitus fleets still scattered across the galaxy, of worlds barely reclaimed, of faith stretched thin and rebellion simmering in the dark. The Imperium was too fragile for another war, but deep within his soul, Robert Guilliman knew this was no ordinary echo. This was the first step of something vast, a ripple from the past that would soon become a tidal wave. He whispered, "Father, if he has returned, will you face him again? Or must I?" The throne stayed silent, but the light behind it pulsed once, a slow, golden heartbeat. For the briefest instant, Guilliman thought he saw a shadow move across the Emperor's corpse light, a faint silhouette, tall and armored, standing beside the throne as if waiting. Then it vanished, leaving only static and dust. The Primarch of Ultramar closed his eyes. He could feel it now, not just a psychic tremor, but a presence, watching, waiting, remembering, a connection between blood that time and death had failed to sever. Somewhere beyond the stars, a fleet was awakening. Somewhere in the void, the War Master's heart was beating again, and on Terra, beneath the silence of a god who could no longer speak, a single tear of oil fell from a cherub's eye as the past began to breathe. The moon had no name, only a string of forgotten imperial designations, buried under centuries of static in the Adeptus Mechanicus archives. To most of the Imperium, it did not exist. To the few who did know, it was a dead place, a hollow sphere orbiting a long-extinct star, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment and long-frozen fire. But the Mechanicus had found something. Something ancient. Something wrong. The exploration vessel Omnissiah's Mercy had drifted in silence for weeks, before setting down on the moon's cracked crust. No Vox transmissions escaped the system, by Mago's decree. The red-robed adepts of Mars disembarked, their augmetic limbs hissing steam into the cold void as they began the excavation. Under the first layer of dust, they found ruins. Not human. Black stone walls carved with fractal geometry that made the eye ache. Pyramidal foundations half swallowed by ash. But what froze their minds, even through the calm of their machine catechisms, was the faint presence of gold among the black stone. They dug deeper, and what they uncovered was not a ruin. It was a tomb. At the heart of that tomb lay a sarcophagus, 10 meters long, forged from blackened alloy that shimmered with living light. Its surface was etched with half-burned sigils, a language that no data archive recognized. And yet every mind could feel. When the first Auspex scan hit the metal, the device died. Sparks burst, cogitators screamed. Several servitors collapsed as green light bled from their augmetic eyes. Mago's Helix Varn approached the artifact, servo limbs clicking in reverence and dread. His vox filtered through static as he whispered the words of the Canticles of Awakening. By the Omnissiah's will machine, speak thy truth. The sarcophagus did. It answered with a pulse, A deep, resonant thud that shook the cavern dust from the ceiling. The Mechanicus Adepts froze as a heartbeat, a human heartbeat, echoed through the hollow chamber. Then came light. Sickly green, crawling through the cracks like veins. The eye of Horus, that cursed symbol, ignited across the lid, glowing as if branded by the gods themselves. Varn stumbled backward. Even his machine half flinched. Impossible. That sigil is heresy incarnate. The servitors began to chant without orders. Binary prayers spilled from their mouths, as if controlled by a force older than Mars itself. Their data slates began rewriting their own scripture, code bleeding into pictograms of the Luna Wolves' insignia. The Magos ordered the area sealed. He called for a null shield perimeter. But the energy would not stop. Every machine spirit screamed in protest. Vox channels filled with ghost voices, battle cries of the Great Crusade, names, coordinates, dying oaths. One phrase repeated endlessly in the static. For the War Master. Then the sarcophagus moved. A slow hiss filled the chamber as the seals cracked, exhaling millennia of trapped air. Ashen starlight poured out, forming the faint outline of a man standing above the artifact, tall, armored, the suggestion of a wolf's pelt on his shoulder. No face. Only the impression of memory. The adepts fell to their knees, not out of worship, but instinct. Something in their biological memory screamed submission. A genetic recoil from the echo of command. Varn tried to speak the litany of containment. His voice broke halfway. By the Omnissiah's grace remained sealed, but the voice that answered was not his. It came from everywhere and nowhere. A human tone, but deeper, colder, calm. The long war was never over. Every light died. The tomb went black. Outside, orbiting ships detected a surge, a blast of psychic static that fried every relay within 100,000 kilometers. The moon's crust cracked like an eggshell, glowing from within as if something immense and buried was breathing again. When the light returned, the adepts were gone. Only the sarcophagus remained, standing open. Inside was no body, only ashes, and the faint outline of a handprint burned into the metal. Hours later, aboard Omnissiah's Mercy, Magos Helix Varn was found seated at the command throne. Eyes open, flesh gone pale. In his hands he held a data slate on which one phrase had been carved in his own blood. Luna Wolves, operational. And outside the viewport, the dead moon was no longer alone. Thousands of small, flickering dots appeared in orbit, wrecks, derelicts. Ancient ships once thought lost to the great heresy, all moving in perfect formation, silent, precise, like soldiers answering a forgotten command. The Mechanicus later sealed all records of the expedition. The moon was declared a no-fly zone, sanctified under the Lex Mechanicus for containment of techno-heresy. But every night, the local astropathic relays picked up the same signal, a single pulse repeating through the void, a heartbeat. And behind it, faint and unmistakable, the echo of a voice saying, "I served the Emperor once. Now I serve truth." The void was never still, but now it breathed. At first, the phenomenon was dismissed as a minor warp anomaly, a localized flare in the psychic tides around the ghoul stars. The Imperium had grown used to such storms. Since the birth of the Great Rift, tempests of madness and light, tearing holes between the realms of man and nightmare. But this was different. It had rhythm. Every few hours the Astronomicon flickered. Every few hours, a pulse of raw psychic force rippled across reality, measured, deliberate, alive. Like the beat of a heart. On Cadral Ix, the astropaths of the planetary relay choir screamed in unison before their minds burned out. Before death took them, they transmitted one word: awakening. On the forge world of Rin Theta, the void shields trembled as green lightning arced across the planet's orbit. The machine spirits howled. Entire data vaults began rewriting themselves. erasing centuries of Imperial scripture and replacing it with corrupted code, coordinates pointing toward a single dead system. And on the bridge of the Phalanx, Lord Commander Rogel Dorn's fortress ship turned relic. Even the ancient machine spirits stirred uneasily. They whispered in static. They called out a name. Warmaster. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica went mad trying to contain it. The waves of psychic feedback shattered thousands of mortal minds. Choirs across Segmentum Solar and Tempestus bled from their eyes and ears as they tried to stabilize the signal. But every attempt failed. Because the warp itself was not reacting. It was listening. Each pulse spread further, from one star to the next, like veins lighting up in the darkness. Planets flickered in and out of contact. Ships reported hallucinations of long-dead space marines walking through the corridors, whispering forgotten oaths. Luna wolves never die. An entire Black Templars fleet vanished into the warp near the Halitus Nebula. Their last vox log captured chanting, hundreds of voices repeating in perfect rhythm with the heartbeat. No demon names, no warp screams. Just the sound of armored boots marching in unison. On Terra, Guilliman felt it again. The same tremor that had struck his soul now roared like thunder. He saw flashes in his mind, old faces, old battles, old brothers. The warp was bleeding memory into the material realm. And all of it pointed toward one truth. Something ancient was forcing its way back into existence. He summoned the Grey Knights. He ordered psychic relays doubled, the Ordo Malleus deployed to every sector where the heartbeat was strongest. Yet every exorcism, every sanctified barrier failed. The pulses continued, deeper, stronger. Even the Chaos Gods seemed unsettled. In the Eye of Terror, demons howled at unseen light. The warp's endless screams faltered, their chaos turned confused. Something was reshaping the current. Something that was not theirs. The heartbeat grew faster. On the shrine world of Veralia, where pilgrims walked barefoot on bones, a miracle occurred, or a curse. The statues of imperial saints began to bleed from the eyes. Their tears glowed faint green. And when the wind howled through the cathedrals, it carried whispers, 1,000 overlapping voices murmuring a single name, Horus. The ecclesiarchy declared it blasphemy. They burned the cathedrals to the ground. But when the fires died, the ash formed the Eye of Horus across the sky, visible from orbit. Within the warp itself, demons gathered around the pulses, curious and terrified. They saw shapes forming, not demonic, not divine. Something mechanical, metallic, disciplined. A presence that did not belong to chaos or order, but something in between. The heartbeat was not chaos. It was command. It was control. A perfect rhythm of will, remaking the immaterium in the image of one who had once defied gods and emperors alike. Across 1,000 worlds, psychers woke screaming in unison. Each one described the same vision. A great black sun rising behind a figure of broken gold and silver. A giant, his armor cracked but his eyes burning with green light. In one hand, a mace. In the other, a fragment of the eye itself, pulsing like a star's heart. And when he spoke, reality listened. I am not chaos. I am not man. I am the memory you tried to bury. The dream ended every time the same way. The sound of a massive heartbeat shaking the universe apart. In the Segmentum Pacificus, Imperial ships began to lose warp guidance altogether. Their Geller fields flickered, not collapsing, but restructuring. The walls between real space and the immaterium bent like glass, showing glimpses of vast fleets moving in perfect silence, vessels that bore no chaos markings. Only the faded, almost erased sigil of the 16th Legion docked by the 7th Pulse. The Astronomicon itself began to respond. Its golden flame faltered, stuttering in time with the heartbeat, as if two wills were fighting for dominance over reality's rhythm. The Emperor's light against something older, colder, and alive, for the first time in 10,000 years. The mechanicus detected measurable vibration from the Golden Throne's machinery, as if its occupant, long silent and entombed, had moved and far across the void. The heartbeat came one last time, a thunderous, bone-shattering wave that rippled through both realms. Then silence. Every relay, every psychic choir, every ship went dark for 9 minutes and 16 seconds. When the light returned, the stars had shifted, slightly, but unmistakably, forming a new constellation. A shape that no one dared name aloud. But in the records of the navigator houses, one phrase appeared across their warp maps, written in an unknown hand: the War Master lives. They said the visions began as whispers, gentle, sorrowful, almost prayer-like. By the time the ecclesiarchy realized the truth, half the saints across the segmentum solar were already speaking in tongues. On Terra, the High Lords sealed the reports, calling them heresy born of exhaustion. But the pilgrims who heard the sermons knew better. The saints were not preaching. They were remembering. It started with Saint Celestine. In the middle of her sermon to the Order of the Argent Shroud, her eyes turned black. Her voice fractured into two, one that cried in agony, and another that whispered like metal grinding on stone. The candles in the great hall turned green, and through the echoing cathedral came her scream: "The moon is broken. The sun burns beside it." Moments later, she collapsed, wings dissolving into ash that glowed with crimson embers. Across the galaxy, other saints fell to the same fate. Saint Artemis of Mars, who once blessed the Titans of Legio Ignatum, stood motionless before the forge's crucible. When he finally spoke, his face was lit from below by molten iron, reflecting a cracked moon and a figure wreathed in burning green flame. "The Father bleeds light," he said, "and the Son carries his wound." Then, like a statue, he crumbled into dust. The reports grew impossible to ignore. On the shrine world of Penthea, pilgrims gathered as the sky split open. There, above the Basilica of 10,000 Skulls, a colossal vision took form: a moon split in half, its core glowing like molten emerald, its fragments orbiting a figure of impossible size. A warrior in shattered golden armor stood beside it, his form burning with green and crimson fire. His face was half shrouded in shadow, half revealed, scarred, hollow, yet alive. And though no sound came from the apparition, the faithful swore they heard a whisper in their minds: he was not saved. He was rebuilt. Inquisitors scoured the galaxy for answers. They burned archives, silenced entire cults, destroyed planets where the visions multiplied. But the more they tried to erase it, the stronger the visions became. Astropaths began transmitting impossible data, energy signatures identical to Necron tomb networks, overlapping Imperial relics that hadn't stirred since the Great Crusade. Binary prayers merged with warp echoes. Faith and machine began to synchronize. And through that impossible alignment, one truth began to surface: someone was using the warp as a mirror. In the void between the stars, far from Imperial patrols, a derelict Luna Wolves cruiser drifted silently. Its hull was blackened, its Vox long dead. Yet deep within, in the dark of the chapel deck, an ancient cogitator stirred to life for the first time in 10,000 years. It projected a single hologram: a moon, cracked and bleeding light, orbiting a burning silhouette of a man. The machine repeated one phrase over and over, in binary mixed with Low Gothic: "The Son remembers the Father's betrayal." By now, Guilliman could no longer deny it. Reports flooded from every corner of the Imperium. Saints speaking in lost tongues, the Astronomicon pulsing like a wounded heart. The constellations shifting subtly. All of it led to the same vision. He stood alone in the throne hall, staring at the dying light of the Emperor. Beneath his breath, he muttered, "Brother, what have you become?" And somewhere, across the veil, something answered. A flicker of warmth, not love, but recognition. As if a distant voice whispered back through the immaterium, I became what you could not. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared the celestial alignment impossible, yet the data did not lie. A moon within the Sol system had fractured in ways that defied gravity and physics. Its pieces did not drift apart but hovered, orbiting one another like organs of a living machine. Energy readings matched Necron phase matrices, but the light they emitted pulsed in warp rhythm, faith and science, soul and circuit, all blended into one impossible signal dot at its center. The astronomers detected an outline, humanoid, massive, burning like a star. The Vox transmissions that followed were filled with static and screams. But one phrase repeated across dozens of recordings: "The burning sun watches the Father's throne." Then came the night of silence. Every shrine whirled, every cathedral, every bastion of the Ministorum fell quiet at once. For 9 hours no prayers could be heard, no hymns sung. The statues of saints wept black oil, and the relics of martyrs bled green fire. When dawn rose again, every stained glass mural across the Imperium had changed, subtly but unmistakably. Where once the Emperor stood alone in gold, there now stood a second figure beside him, shadowed, scorched, holding half of a broken moon. The ecclesiarchy declared it mass hallucination. But those who saw it felt it in their souls. The Father and the Son, no longer enemies, but something worse. A reflection of each other. On a desolate moon in the halo stars, a Necron tomb world reactivated. The cryptex recorded a sudden warp anomaly, a humanoid presence of human origin, fused with phase technology, radiating both psychic energy and necrodermis resonance. Their data translated one identifier, burned into the ether like a brand. Primarch designation, Horus Lupercal. Status reconstructed. And as the tomb world's engines awoke, the broken moon above them aligned with the burning sun, a perfect eclipse of light and death. Across the galaxy, warp storms began to rise once more, now tinged with metallic green lightning. For 10,000 years, the sound of the Golden Throne had been the rhythm of stagnation, the endless drone of machinery older than empires, keeping the god alive in death. It had never faltered. It had never changed dot until now. At first, it was a tremor, so subtle that only the servoskulls heard it. The tech adepts tending the sacred cables dismissed it as vibration, an echo from the reactor beneath the Imperial Palace. But the tremor grew, the air thickened. The light dimmed dot, and then, through the miles of sanctified steel and gold that encased the throne room, came the hum. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. Every machine spirit within the palace stirred at once. Incense burners swung wildly as magnetic currents shifted. Candles bent toward the throne, as if pulled by unseen gravity. The Adeptus Custodes formed ranks, uncertain for the first time in centuries. The hum deepened, rhythmic, pulsing like the beat of a heart, answering. The same impossible pulse that had been felt across the galaxy. But it wasn't the Emperor reaching out. It was something reaching back. Guilliman was the first to sense it. He had been standing before the throne, speaking prayers that had long turned to ash in his throat. When the vibration passed through the marble beneath his feet, he felt it not as sound, but as memory. The memory of a battlefield, of lightning, of a brother standing before him, eyes full of fire and betrayal. The room darkened dot, and for a brief moment, the Emperor's golden light flickered, not extinguished, but eclipsed. The Mechanicus screamed heresy as readouts spiked. Power output from the throne's reactor surged beyond recorded limits. Psychic containment fields wavered. Then the noosphere filled with static, not random noise, but pattern. Binary signals pulsed through the data streams, forming words older than the Imperium itself. Father, I remember. Across the galaxy, every psychic sensitive collapsed in agony. Astropaths bled from their eyes, crying the same phrases in every tongue. The throne calls. The throne answers. The throne bleeds. On Terra, The oracles of the Astronomicon convulsed as its flame dimmed to a sickly green, then reignited in blood-red light. The warp storms howled in harmony. Every world connected to the Imperial network felt it. The moment reality quivered. Like a wound reopening dot in the catacombs beneath the throne room. The Sisters of Silence broke their sacred vow. For the first time in millennia, one of them spoke. Her voice was dry as dust, but clear. He hears him. The Custodes froze. The Adeptus Mechanicus recited litanies of containment. But none could drown out the sound, the voice beneath the hum, the whisper within the walls, a voice both divine and human, infinite and broken. "Where is my son?" The sound spread like a virus. Through the throne's conduits, through the noosphere, through the warp. Entire planets of the Adeptus Mechanicus received the same psychic ping simultaneously, an untraceable frequency buried within the Emperor's machine code. They recognized the pattern. They had seen it once before in the ancient genetic code of the Primarchs. The Emperor was reaching across space, not with faith, not with light, but with signal dot in the eye of terror. The Chaos Gods stirred uneasily. They had long fed upon the corpse of the Emperor's power, his eternal suffering sustaining their endless war. Now they felt something shift. The throne's agony no longer sustained them, it resisted. It pulsed like a fortress reactivating after an age of ruin. Khorne roared in defiance. Tzeentch whispered uncertainty. Nurgle's rot recoiled. Slaanesh fell silent. For the first time since the siege of Terra, the gods themselves hesitated. Something ancient had remembered how to fight back. Deep in the sanctum beneath the palace, the golden throne began to change. The metal beneath the Emperor's lifeless body rippled like liquid mercury. The cables feeding into his ruined flesh hummed with new light, not golden, but spectral green. Servo arms moved on their own. Ancient systems, untouched since the dark age of technology, awoke and realigned. The throne began to repair itself. The Magos biologists monitoring the process screamed as their augmetics overloaded. They saw neural pathways reigniting, brain matter that had been inert for 10,000 years flickering with life. The Emperor's heart, long still, long silent, twitched just once, but it was enough all of Terra felt it. The ground shuddered. The sky above the palace turned black and red, streaked with veins of green light. Every soul across the planet heard it in their minds, a single heartbeat, deep and colossal, echoing through reality. Boom! The Emperor lives. Boom! The Emperor remembers. Boom! The Emperor answers. On Mars, the Fabricator General fell to his knees as every Forge world received the same encrypted message, a code so old it predated the Mechanicum itself. It read, "All systems recalibrating. Origin signal, soul, response link established." And then, at the very bottom of the message, a signature appeared that no one alive had seen before. Designation, War Master. Guilliman fell to his knees before the throne. Tears, real, human tears, ran down his face. "Father," he whispered, "what are you doing?" And from within the dying light, a whisper echoed back, not the Emperor's voice as Guilliman remembered it, but something older, colder, almost mechanical. Answering him. Across the stars, on the other side of the warp, the burning sun stood upon the ruins of the broken moon. He raised his hand toward Terra, and the heartbeat of both gods, father and son, aligned. The galaxy trembled. Faith and logic, warp and machine, love and hate, all converged in one impossible rhythm. The throne roared with light. The eye of terror flared like a wound reopening, and the universe held its breath. The eye of terror pulsed once, a heartbeat in the void. Then again. Then again. Each thrum sent waves of impossible energy rippling through the warp, warping everything it touched. The demons that had roamed its endless storms for 10 millennia paused, confused, their twisted forms shimmering like reflections on broken glass. They looked upward, as if the sky itself were trembling. And then the impossible began. The eye began to flicker. The great wound in reality, once a vast sea of screaming souls and eternal fire, now shivered like a dying flame. The light that had once poured from it, crimson, violet, sickly gold, dimmed into shadow. The warp winds grew silent. The roars of its gods weakened to whispers. For the first time since the birth of chaos, the Imperium itself hesitated that far across the stars. Imperial ships patrolling the Segmentum Obscurus detected the change. The readings were incomprehensible, psychic static twisting into rhythm, like coded pulses of light and shadow. The astropaths aboard felt it as pain, like needles behind their eyes. But beneath the agony, they sensed something more terrible, intent. The warp wasn't merely faltering. It was responding. From the depths of the eye, reality folded inward. Stars inverted. Demons screamed and tore themselves apart, unable to exist within the changing current. The realm of chaos, infinite, mad, alive, began to collapse. Slowly, like an ocean draining into a black hole, everything was being pulled toward a single point of light. That light grew brighter. Green, metallic, and wrong. The four chaos gods watched from their thrones of rot and sin, their laughter replaced by silence. Khorne's brass citadel cracked under invisible strain. Tzeentch's labyrinth of thought unraveled, its pathways twisting into geometric perfection. Nurgle's garden withered to dust. Slaanesh mirror palaces shattered, their reflections turning to static dot, and through the ruin, they saw it, a figure walking across the warp as if through fog. He was vast, broken, burning. His armor, once black, now shimmered with veins of green energy pulsing beneath its surface. The eye of Horus glowed faintly upon his chest, its light cold and steady. In his hand he held no weapon, only fragments of something ancient, shards of the Emperor's golden aura, torn from the fabric of divinity itself. Every demon that dared approach him disintegrated. Their screams turned to metallic echoes, like data being deleted from existence. The Chaos Gods roared as one. Khorne's voice was thunder. Tzeentch's wind. Nurgle's rot. Slaanesh's song. Together they hurled their armies upon him, billions of warped monstrosities, born of rage, decay, lust, and deceit. The burning sun did not move. He only raised his hand. The air cracked. A shockwave of green-white light erupted from him, and where it passed, chaos simply ceased to be. Not destroyed, not banished, erased. The eye of terror began to collapse faster. The gods screamed, their forms twisting, flickering between existence and void. For every moment they resisted, the light grew stronger, structured, mathematical, absolute. This was not the light of faith, nor the energy of the warp. It was something beyond both, the cold, perfect logic of the Necron machine combined with the will of a demigod. Horus had returned, but not as Chaos Champion. He had become something new, an anomaly that the gods themselves could not comprehend. A bridge between the living metal and the immortal soul. The unholy child of divinity and code. He gazed upward, beyond the eye, beyond the storm, to the galaxy stretched before him. His voice echoed through both realms, mechanical and human, sorrowful and divine. I was your weapon. I was your sin. But I have seen the truth. The gods are nothing but circuits of fear. Every word tore holes in the warp. Every syllable made reality quiver. On Terra, the golden throne trembled again. The Emperor's light faltered, his corpse machine humming in resonance with the dying eye. Across the palace, the walls shook. Guilliman stared up in horror as the sky above Terra turned crimson, then black, then green. Father, he whispered. He's breaking them. In the void, the eye's colors imploded into pure white. The screams of the gods faded into silence. A final blinding pulse rippled outward, a wave that crossed the galaxy in seconds. It shattered warp storms, extinguished demons, and silenced every choir of the Astra Telepathica. For 9 heartbeats, the universe stood still, and in that silence, mortals dreamed of peace. The warp calmed. The stars shone brighter. Ships lost in the Imperium reappeared, untouched. Planets once cursed by chaos awoke to dawns untainted by madness. But it was not salvation. The light that replaced the eye was cold and mechanical. A vast ring of green fire hung where the warp storm had been, a perfect circle, precise and artificial. Within it, something moved, enormous structures of living metal, arranging themselves into a lattice that spanned like years. The eye of terror was gone. In its place stood a gateway, a wound healed, but not by the Emperor. On the bridge of the phalanx, Imperial augurs screamed as the readings came in. The energy signature matched Necron technology, impossibly amplified. Rewritten with psychic resonance, the galaxy had traded one nightmare for another, and in the center of that cold, artificial sun stood the burning sun himself. His armor shimmered with shifting sigils of both chaos and machine, his face unreadable behind a cracked visor. When he spoke, his voice echoed through every soul still bound to the Emperor's light. I am no longer your war master. I am the architect of balance. Then, as the lattice began to spin, a beam of light pierced the void, straight toward Terra. The throne answered. And the galaxy awoke to a new war, not between faith and heresy, but between creation itself and the will of the dead. The hum of the throne deepened. The sky above the palace split open. The Emperor's eyes flickered with faint mechanical light. Across the stars, in the silence left by the dying gods, Horus smiled. The light from the dead eye had not faded, it had changed. Where madness once bled into the galaxy, order now spread like infection. The warp no longer screamed. It sang in static harmony, a cold rhythm that made psychers weep and machines pray. Across the Imperium, the silence after the cataclysm was unbearable. Astropaths reported a feeling of vast distance, as if their souls were sealed behind glass. Navigators looked into the void and saw not storms, but endless grids of green light. Stretching like circuitry between the stars, the warp had become a map, and at the heart of it, that new, impossible lattice where the eye once burned, something pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. The source was moving, the first to see it were the black ships of the Inquisition, patrolling the edges of the Segmentum Obscurus. The void around them darkened. Their augurs detected no warp activity, no radiation. Then a shadow eclipsed every star. It was not a fleet. It was a continent of metal, floating silently. Its surface carved with symbols both Necron and human. A city forged from the bones of gods. As it passed, Vox systems crackled with whispers and 2 voices, one deep and mechanical, the other human, calm, sorrowful. Do you hear it, Father? The quiet between the stars? The ships tried to fire. Their lances turned against themselves. Their crews turned to salt, their minds erased in an instant of impossible logic. When the shadow passed, only drifting ash and silence remained. On Terra, the golden throne shuddered as the signal reached it. The Emperor's body convulsed once, the cables feeding him glowing brighter than they ever had before. The light of the Astronomicon wavered and then split into 2 distinct beams, one golden, one green, twisting around each other like serpents. The Adeptus Custodes knelt in confusion. The Mechanicus chanted praise and fear in equal measure. The hum became a voice, deep and resonant, vibrating through the palace walls. He comes. Guilliman stood before the throne, armor scorched from the energy bleeding out of the Emperor's chamber. He looked into the blinding light and spoke softly. If you made him, Father, then what have you unmade now? The answer came not in words, but in movement. The statues lining the Hall of Heroes began to crack. The marble split down the middle, and from within their hollow forms came a dim green glow. The statues of long-dead primarchs, Sanguinius, Dorn, even Horus himself, wept molten gold. The walls shook. And somewhere far beyond the veil, the burning sun opened his eyes. The lattice in the void began to unfold. Its geometry perfect, its light colder than any star. From its core came vessels of living metal shaped like ancient imperial warships, their hulls engraved with fragments of imperial scripture. Between their ranks floated structures like cathedrals, powered by Nicron technology, pulsing with faint psychic energy. They called it the Concord of Silence, a fleet not of war, but of conversion. Where it passed, warp storms died. Demons evaporated. Entire planets fell into dreamless sleep. Their souls disconnected from the Imperium. Inquisitors who witnessed it sent one final message before disappearing. The galaxy is being rewritten. Unholy terror. The Emperor's voice finally broke through the static, faint, broken, but unmistakably alive. "Stop him," he whispered through the dying Astronomicon. "He cannot see what waits beyond." But Horus had already seen in the lightless gulf where the eye once burned. He stood atop the surface of a world that was not a world, a metallic sphere suspended in the void, glowing with both warp and quantum energy. Beneath his feet, the surface pulsed with runes forming patterns of DNA, machine code, and divine script. He reached down and touched it. It responded like flesh. Images flooded his mind. Memories not his own. Voices of long-dead Necron kings. Fragments of ancient humanity before the warp became their prison. He saw what the old ones had feared, what the Emperor had tried to suppress. The unity of thought and soul. The end of duality between machine and spirit. A new creation. Neither mortal nor divine. His voice spread through the void, reaching every psychic ear. Every machine spirit. Every dreaming saint. The gods lied. The Emperor caged you. But I will set you free. On 10,000 worlds, statues cracked. Churches crumbled. Machine forges hummed to life on their own. And on every world, mortals began to dream the same dream, of a burning figure standing beside a throne of light and wire. Holding out his hand, some wept. Others prayed. A few whispered his name. The Mechanicus called it the awakening signal. The Ecclesiarchy called it the second heresy. Guilliman assembled the Primaris chapters. He ordered every fleet toward Sol, every defense line raised. He knew war was coming, not one of faith, but of reality itself. For the first time in ages, he felt something he hadn't since his brother fell. Fear. In the silence of the throne hall. He turned to the dim figure encased in gold and whispered, "You cannot stop him, can you?" The Emperor did not answer. Only the hum replied, deeper now, echoing the same pattern pulsing across the stars. The same heartbeat that had once belonged to Horus. And then, across the night sky, every star flickered in unison. A voice, calm, vast, beautiful, and terrible, spoke across the galaxy. "Father, I am coming home." The warp rippled like water. The new lattice of light flared green, then gold, then darkness. On Terra, the throne's power surged. The Emperor's eyes opened, and the stars themselves screamed. The stars screamed, but their sound was not carried by air or matter, it was carried by thought. Every psyker in the Imperium, every choir and astropath, every navigator and dreamer felt it like a knife in the soul. The universe convulsed in a single impossible breath. Across the galaxy, systems went blind. The Astronomicon's twin beams, gold and green, shattered into a storm of light that painted the void in terrible beauty. For a heartbeat, the galaxy saw itself reflected, not as it was, but as it could have been. Every living mind glimpsed the truth that the warp had hidden since the dawn of mankind. Creation and destruction were never enemies. Only two sides of the same God. In Horus, reborn, reassembled. Something greater and lesser than the primarch he had been stood at the heart of that revelation. he was no longer flesh. His armor was alive, rippling with living metal that pulsed with each breath he didn't need to take. His face was ghostly pale beneath translucent plating, his eyes molten green with faint flickers of gold. A faint halo of static hovered behind his head, like the glitching crown of a forgotten god. He was both machine and memory, and he smiled, faintly, almost sadly. "I remember what it meant to be your son," he whispered to the void. "And I remember what it meant to betray you." The lattice of light surrounding him shifted, forming into millions of streams of data and faith, souls, prayers, and memories intertwined. They spiraled outward like veins through the galaxy, connecting the living to the dead, the human to the machine. On distant worlds, Necron tunes stirred. Their stasis fields flickered as they received the pulse, not a command, but an invitation. In the ruins of once holy cities, the faithful felt their relics vibrate, whispering in binary hymns. For the first time, the ancient hatred between man and Necron began to blur. Both species drawn to the same beacon in the void. The galaxy shuddered as a new power began to take form. On Mars, the noosphere erupted into chaos. Tech priests screamed as their augmetics turned against them, chanting words in languages not written since the war in heaven. The Omniscience symbols warped into spirals of data that spelled a new name, Lupus Machina. The Fabricator General himself fell to his knees, eyes glowing green as his neural implants overloaded with impossible visions. He saw a figure walking through the forges of Mars, Horus, but not as a Primarch, as something else, something that understood the machine. "You sought the divine in circuits," Horus said softly, walking past burning reactors and chanting servitors. But divinity was always within the pattern. Every cogitator across the red planet flickered to life, forming a single vast image, a human hand reaching toward a skeletal one, unity between spirit and mechanism. For a moment, the machine god answered back. In the Segmentum Solar, Guilliman's fleet approached Terra. His ship trembled as its Geller. Fields screamed under pressure from the new reality forming around it. Warp and matter no longer obeyed separation. Demons appeared not as nightmares, but as living logic, merging into the ship's systems like digital ghosts. His lieutenants prayed, but their prayers came out in broken code. Guilliman stood in the command chamber, his eyes locked on the planet ahead. Terra no longer glowed with the pale gold of the Emperor's light. It pulsed with two colors, gold and green, twisting around each other like DNA. He whispered, "Father, what have you done?" No answer came, but deep within the palace, beneath miles of sanctified vaults, the Emperor stirred again. The throne cracked. Golden armor shifted. The smell of ozone filled the chamber. For the first time in 10,000 years, he moved. The custodies who guarded him wept blood. The Mechanicus adepts screamed as their implants shorted. The psychic field of the entire planet wavered, and the Emperor spoke, not with words, but with will. The message burned itself into every mind across Terra. "He does not return as my son. He returns as my reflection." In orbit above the cradle of humanity, a shadow eclipsed the sun. Horus's fleet, the Concord of Silence, arrived in perfect formation. Its ships radiated a blinding geometric light, neither warp nor matter, but something that fused both into a single impossible state. The Vox crackled. Every channel filled with a voice that was both machine code and sorrow. "I bring you peace, the peace of unity." The defenses of Terra opened fire, but the shots dissolved before reaching their targets, unraveling into particles of light. The fleet did not retaliate. Instead, it began to broadcast not a message, but a frequency. The same hum that had haunted the Emperor's throne since the Eye collapsed. Within hours, every machine spirit on Terra began to sing. The sound resonated through metal, stone, and flesh alike. People fell to their knees, eyes glowing faintly green, whispering Horus's name like a prayer. Then amidst the chaos, Guilliman arrived. His fleet pierced the outer perimeter, its engines burning blue against the smog-choked stars. He descended to the surface, his boots striking the marble of the Eternity Gate. He looked up and saw him. Horus stood at the base of the palace, the air around him shimmering with ghostlight, his armor adorned with shifting runes of the Catan and the Aquila intertwined. His expression was not one of hatred nor triumph. It was grief. "Brother," Horus said, his voice deep, almost human. "It's over. Let it end." Guilliman raised his sword, his eyes full of fury and disbelief. "You destroyed everything once. You will not do it again." Horus looked past him, toward the golden throne. "No," he said softly. "I will finish what he began." The sky darkened. The green-gold light spread across the palace walls. Reality bent and folded like molten glass dot in that moment, as the two sons of the Emperor faced each other for the last time. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, and in the silence between them, the voice of the Emperor whispered, faint and broken, echoing across time and thought. "My sons." The stars pulsed once more, and then the universe began to change. The universe began to change, not through fire or destruction, but through rewriting. The laws that had defined existence for millennia started to blur, reforge, and bleed into one another like paint and water. Warp and matter no longer opposed each other. They fused, thread by thread. The Imperium stopped screaming. Instead, it whispered, softly, beautifully, in patterns of light and logic. Every living soul became an echo in that pattern, their fears and prayers dissolving into a shared hum that stretched across the stars. The age of chaos was ending. But peace, as always in the galaxy, came dressed as horror. On Terra, the sky was no longer blue or black, it was alive. Rivers of golden and green energy flowed like auroras, descending over the world's surface in spectral waves. The towers of the Imperial Palace glowed from within, their walls bending and reforming as if remembering the time before they were stone. Every servo skull, every data slate, every Mechanicus forge began to chant in binary psalms, harmonizing with the hum that filled the air. The golden throne itself was no longer a machine, it was transforming. Its surface rippled like liquid light, its thousands of cables glowing brighter than the sun. The Emperor's form, once still and decaying, began to shift beneath the armor. His flesh became translucent, his veins shining with data light. His face, once human, now reflected 1,000 patterns, fragments of all those who had ever worshipped him. And as he stirred, Horus knelt before him, that he was no longer the War Master, nor the fallen son. He was something older, a vessel made of regret, flesh, and machine. His armor glowed with the same code that pulsed through the lattice of reality, his hands trembling as he pressed them to the cold marble of the throne hall. "I see it now," Horus whispered, voice trembling with static and sorrow. The Imperium was never meant to live. It was meant to evolve. The Emperor's eyes opened. The light that poured from them was not holy, it was analytical, dissecting, total. Every molecule in the chamber vibrated under that gaze. Guilliman staggered backward, his armor blistering from the sheer psychic heat. "You speak of evolution," the Emperor's voice thundered, vast and resonant, echoing across the minds of billions. "But you do not understand what it demands." "I understand," Horus replied, lifting his head. His eyes, molten gold and green, glimmered with both love and defiance. "You wanted to save humanity from gods. I want to make them their own." The palace trembled. The light grew unbearable. Statues cracked, icons bled molten gold, and banners of the Aquila turned to ash. Across the Imperium, communication systems failed as reality itself folded inward, on Mars. The forges ignited into pillars of green fire, and the machine god's digital hymn grew louder, a binary requiem that merged with the Emperor's psychic will. The Mechanicus fell to their knees as the two frequencies aligned, producing a single terrifying tone that echoed through time itself. In the warp, demons screamed as their realms collapsed. Their flesh twisted into geometric prisms, their roars reduced to fractal equations. Gods of chaos, ancient and vast, writhed as their own essence was devoured by the new order spreading from Terra. Slaanesh flickered and vanished first, dissolving into a shimmer of colorless light. Nurgle's garden withered, its rotting branches turning to glass. Tzeentch's ever-changing maze froze mid-shift, its patterns locked in perfect symmetry. Khorne's brass citadel cracked and fell silent, his throne left empty and in their place. A new shape began to rise, from the eye's dead husk. A structure emerged, vast, incomprehensible, mechanical and divine. It was the shape of a human skull carved from living metal, wrapped in an aura of emerald flame. Its hollow eyes burned with twin suns, gold and green, and its voice filled the void. The age of belief is over. The age of becoming begins. Across the galaxy, worlds knelt, not by choice, but by resonance. Billions of souls merged into the new lattice, their individuality fading into a single collective hum. They did not die. They connected. The Imperium's prayers turned into code. The Necron's tombs opened not for war, but for awakening. Even the fragments of dead chaos gods were absorbed, their power converted into the architecture of a new consciousness. On Terra, the Emperor rose fully from the throne. The machine that had sustained him disintegrated into motes of light, merging with his form. His wings unfolded, not of feathers but of light and data, stretching from horizon to horizon. Horus stood before him, awestruck. His voice was quiet, reverent, trembling. "Father, is this what you feared? Or what you desired?" The Emperor looked down upon him, and for a fleeting moment, there was something human in his gaze. "Both," he said. Then his hand reached forward, touching Horus's chest. The touch burned with both agony and peace. The runes on Horus's armor flared, the living metal rippling as if alive with memory. Guilliman shouted, his voice breaking the silence. "Stop this! He will destroy everything." But as Horus screamed, the light around him changed, his armor shattering into dust, his form dissolving into the same energy that filled the sky. His last words echoed through the chamber, soft as dying breath. "No, brother. He will save it." The light exploded outward. Terra disappeared behind a storm of brilliance. The warp collapsed in on itself, folding neatly into the material realm. For the first time since time began, there was no division between reality and dream. God and mortal, faith and fact. And as the storm faded, a new dawn rose. The stars shone brighter, not burning, but alive. The galaxy was silent, unified, and aware. Where once there had been 1,000 gods, there was now one. Not the Emperor. Not Horus, but both, intertwined, reborn. Endless, the voice of the new god filled the void. Gentle and final, the Imperium is no more. Humanity has become divine. And then silence. Only the hum remained. Steady, eternal, echoing across the quiet stars.